In 1849, a British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard, excavating the ruins of an ancient palace near Mosul in what is now Iraq, began pulling thousands of small clay tablets out of the rubble, each one covered in dense, wedge-shaped cuneiform script. His assistant, Layard and Rassam, continued the work over the following years, eventually recovering fragments from what turned out to be the largest and most organized collection of written literature. Knowledge to survive from the ancient world. The royal library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, buried under the ruins of Nineveh for roughly 2,500 years. The library contained somewhere in the range of 30,000 tablets and fragments, covering subjects as varied as medicine, astronomy, mathematics, religious ritual, royal history, grammar, divination, and literature, including, buried among the fragments, a text that would turn out to contain the oldest known written story in human history. And the way this library was organized, cataloged, and physically constructed reveals something genuinely startling. Nearly 3,000 years ago, someone had already built a working information retrieval system designed specifically so that a reader could locate a specific text within a massive archive without having to search through everything. If real archaeological discoveries that quietly rewrite what we assumed about ancient information systems are why you're here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We go looking for the next one every week. Ashurbanipal ruled the Neo-Assyrian Empire from 669 to roughly 631 BC, presiding over an empire that, at its height, stretched from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, making it arguably the largest empire the world had yet seen. What makes Ashurbanipal unusual among ancient kings, and what makes his library possible in the first place, is a claim he made about himself in his own surviving inscriptions. He stated that he had personally learned to read and write cuneiform, including the specialized, difficult Sumerian language used in older scholarly and religious texts, a skill most Assyrian kings delegated entirely to professional scribes. Whether or not Ashurbanipal was being fully literal in describing his own scholarly credentials, the inscriptions make clear he took an unusually personal interest in acquiring and preserving written knowledge, and the archaeological evidence backs this up. His agents were documented sending letters throughout the empire and beyond, specifically requesting that local scribes copy or send original tablets from temple archives and private collections to be added to the royal collection at Nineveh. The physical organization of the library is where the genuinely striking part of this story lives, because it directly answers a question that would otherwise seem impossible. For an archive this size, how do you find one specific document among 30,000 clay tablets without a librarian able to scan a shelf by eye? Excavators found that many tablets included what scholars now call colophons, short identifying notes, usually at the end of a text, recording the tablet's title, often the first line of the following tablet in a series, to help readers locate the next volume, the owner, or commissioning authority of the tablet, and in many cases, a scribal note confirming the text had been checked and copied accurately against its source. Multi-tablet works, like the great literary and religious series that ran to dozens of individual tablets, were numbered sequentially, allowing a reader or librarian to reconstruct the correct reading order, even if the physical tablets had become separated or shelved out of sequence, which, given the destruction the library eventually suffered, turned out to matter enormously for modern researchers trying to reassemble these works thousands of years later. Tablets also appear to have been organized thematically, with distinct sections of the library apparently dedicated to specific subject categories: omens and divination texts, medical and pharmacological texts, grammatical and lexical texts used for scribal training, royal historical inscriptions, religious ritual texts, and literary works, including myths and epics. Some tablets carry ownership stamps or inscriptions, specifically identifying them as belonging to the Palace of Ashurbanipal, King of the World, King of Assyria, Assyria, a formal marking that both asserted royal ownership and functionally served as a kind of institutional catalog stamp, identifying which section or collection a given tablet belonged to. Among the tens of thousands of recovered fragments was a set of tablets that would go on to become one of the most significant discoveries in the entire history of archaeology, though its true significance wasn't recognized until more than 2 decades after the tablets had already been sitting in the British Museum's collection. In 1872, a self-taught Assyriologist named George Smith, working through unpublished tablet fragments recovered from Nineveh, was translating a portion of what came to be called the Epic of Gilgamesh when he encountered a passage describing a great flood sent by the gods, a hero building a boat to survive it, sending out birds to search for dry land, and the boat coming to rest on a mountain. A narrative structure startlingly similar to the flood story in the biblical book of Genesis, but demonstrably older, copied onto tablets housed in Ashurbanipal's library centuries before the traditional dating of the biblical text. Smith's announcement of the discovery, made public in a lecture to the Society of Biblical Archaeology later that year, caused a genuine sensation, prompting funded expeditions back to Nineveh, specifically to search for missing fragments of the tablet, some of which Smith himself successfully located. The Epic of Gilgamesh itself, pieced together from Ashurbanipal's library tablets alongside earlier fragments from other sites, is now recognized as the oldest substantially complete work of narrative literature to survive from antiquity, predating Homer by well over 1,000 years, following the legendary king of Uruk through a journey involving friendship, grief, and an ultimately unsuccessful quest for immortality, a text that had been completely unknown to the modern world until Assyrian royal scribes careful cataloging and Ashurbanipal's own acquisitiveness happened to preserve a copy that Layard's and Rassam's excavations happened to recover nearly 25 centuries later. There's a genuinely ironic historical detail buried in how this library survived at all. In 612 BC, a coalition of Babylonian and Median forces sacked and burned Nineveh, ending the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and, in the process, setting fire to Ashurbanipal's palace and its library. For any collection of paper, papyrus, or parchment documents, this would have been an unambiguous act of total destruction. But because the library's texts were written on unfired clay tablets, the intense heat of the burning palace effectively baked and hardened them, converting soft, vulnerable clay into durable, fired ceramic, meaning the very fire that ended the library as a functioning institution is very likely the specific reason so many of its tablets survived intact. For archaeologists to recover roughly 2,500 years later, since unfired clay tablets left in more ordinary conditions tend to degrade and dissolve far more easily over comparable timescales. Since Layard and Rassam's original 19th century excavations, the tablets recovered from Ashurbanipal's library have remained a central, ongoing focus of Assyriological research, housed primarily today in the British Museum's collection. Modern scholars continue to identify new joins between previously unconnected fragments, a slow, painstaking process akin to assembling an enormous, still incomplete puzzle spread across tens of thousands of individually cataloged pieces. With digitization projects over the past 2 decades making high-resolution images and translations increasingly accessible to researchers worldwide who don't have direct access to the physical tablets in London, what Layard and Rassam actually uncovered in the 1850s, without initially understanding its full scope, was a nearly 3,000-year-old demonstration that large-scale, organized information storage and retrieval isn't a distinctly modern problem, invented by libraries, universities, or the internet. An Assyrian king ruling an empire before the classical Greek world had produced its major surviving literature had already recognized that a library, without a system for finding things again, wasn't a library at all. It was just a room full of buried information, waiting, as it happened quite literally in this case, for someone with the patience to dig through the ashes and figure out how to read it.